Pretty much for most of this, y'all. Can you hear me? Oh, I need. Better, better. Oh, gotta really be on it. Okay. My name's Tina Marie Fitzgerald. Hello, hello, hello. 1, 2, 3.
Who knows about microphones?
What if I talk really, really loud? Does that work? I can do that. I'm usually told I'm too loud, so. Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Wings of Honor for today's presentation, The Pilot and Passenger. My name's Tina Marie Fitzgerald, and I am happily a member of our board of directors here at the museum. Let's see, today we're happy to have with us individuals who were involved in the 10 November 1972 Southern Airways Flight 49 and the 31st hijacking of 1972. First of all, at the table we have our esteemed Mr. Harold Johnson, who was a co-pilot to the late William Billy Bob Haas, who passed away in February of 2001. We have next to him Miss Debbie Johnson, his daughter, who was 14 years old when this event transpired all those years ago. And then next to Miss Debbie, we have a daughter of the late Mary Emily Melton. Mary Emily Melton was an actual passenger on the flight. Just so while I'm talking, this was a picture of the plane. And Miss Mary Melton, this was a picture of Miss Mary Melton. We pass it around so you get an idea of what Miss Mary looked like.
With my mother? She was my mother was 66. Yeah, and she was taking one else passenger.
And we have Miss Liz, correct? I have two names down. You and Liz?
Liz is my sister. She's not able to come.
Okay,
Sarah.
This is Miss Sarah Polk, Miss Melton's daughter. There were different sources say there were a different number of passengers on board this flight, but we're going to say between 28 and 31. Mr. Johnson and I spoke about this morning. And in addition to the crew of 4. Good to note is that between 1968 and 1972, hijackings were occurring in this country at the rate of approximately 31 every 33.3 days. They were happening quite a bit. But after this event that Mr. Johnson and company were involved in, well, I should let them tell you the story because they know better than I. So right now I'd like to present to you our board of folks here telling you the story of the pilot and the passenger.
Yeah, stand up.
Yes, sir, you may.
Oh.
That's why you got the microphone.
That's why I got the microphone.
I believe it works. Okay, I don't think I can talk sitting down. Anyway, I gave you a map, and this shows where we went. This was supposed to be a simple flight from Memphis to Birmingham to Montgomery to Orlando to Miami. We were going to spend the night, get a good night's rest, come back the same way the next day. But it didn't happen. So anyway, I also gave you a handout that introduces you to the hijackers. Did everyone get one of these? Says the story hijackers. Everybody got that? So just tell about each one of them. I understand we didn't have this information before the hijacking, so we didn't know who they were when they got aboard the airplane. Didn't know who they were after they took over the airplane. Didn't know who they were when they shot me. But anyway, where they came from. But this gives a little bit of their background. And then I also included, and you should have one of these, a timeline of the events. When we departed each airport, when we landed at each airport. And in some cases, we didn't land. We just went to an airport and we went into a holding pattern at the VOR, the Visual Omni Range, that served the navigational facility that served that airport or that area. So this tells about where we went on the trip. It was a long trip, started on Friday evening and all Saturday and wound up into early Sunday morning in Havana. And so you can see where we went. So we landed in Birmingham. I'll be brief about this. Landed in Birmingham, deplaned passengers, took on passengers, and then we took off, headed to Montgomery, and we were scheduled to refuel in Montgomery. Can everyone hear me? So I'm having voice issues, but that's what happens, I guess, when you get to be 89. But anyway, we didn't have much fuel at the time the hijackers took over. I heard a scuffle back in the galley. Well, when you're flying for an airline, you have the privilege of writing passes, and I just thought some pass writer had gotten on in Birmingham and there was a little horseplay going on in the galley, perhaps, but that was not the case. Suddenly, the door burst open, and in came a flight attendant, and the hijacker had his arm around her neck and a gun to her head, and said, "Billy Bob, we're taking over the airplane, taking over the flight." And the flight attendant, Donna Holman, said, "He's not kidding, Billy Bob." And so they made their demands. They wanted $10 million and parachutes and bulletproof vests, and they wanted to go to Detroit. So we alternate legs on the trips. Generally, captain will normally start out, co-pilot then will take the next leg, and then the captain, and so on until we finally arrive. But anyway, so the captain took over at the time the hijackers took over the airplane. He took the controls, and I started handling the radio. So I told air traffic control we needed to go back to Birmingham to get some fuel. And we got a clearance on final approach. They said, "Don't land." We had the gear down, the flaps down. We were ready to land. And they said, "Don't land, go to Jackson, Mississippi and get fuel." So we get a clearance to Jackson and land in Jackson. Normal procedure would be to taxi up to the ramp and be refueled there. They said, "Don't leave the runway." So we had to turn around, back taxi into position to take off. And then they sent a fuel truck out and fueled us. had to keep the engines running, by the way. They wouldn't let us shut down the engines. So anyway, we get the fuel there. Then they want to go to Detroit, so we get a clearance to Detroit. Fly up there. I noticed a side note I put in there that they made all the men take off their clothes between Birmingham and Jackson. I guess they thought they might have some weapons or something. And also, I think there was a feeling there among the hijackers that the guys would be modest and wouldn't tend to want to get up in their undershorts and try to overpower them. So that might have entered into their thinking there also. So anyway, we get to Detroit. They wanted $10 million. We circled Detroit, and they were negotiating, trying to raise the money. This was on a Friday night. Banks were all closed. The company normally just didn't keep $10 million in their office desk, so they were having trouble raising the money. Finally, we ran low on fuel, went to Cleveland, refuel, sat on the ground there for a long, long time, seemed like an eternity while they were training an FBI agent how to fuel the airplane because the normal fueling crew refused to go out. And I'm not sure that I blame them. But anyway, we finally got the fueling done and got a clearance to take off. And this time they wanted to go to Toronto, Canada. So we flew to Toronto and circled there for a long, long time, over 2 hours, trying to get the company to raise that money. And they were making all kinds of demands, all kinds of threats. Finally, we landed in Toronto because we were getting low on fuel. And so the company said, well, we've raised $250,000. That upset them a lot. They didn't like that idea. That was a long way from 10 million. So we refueled in Toronto and took off, and they wanted to go to Knoxville, Tennessee. And their threat was that company had a deadline of 1 o'clock that afternoon to have this money. If not, they were going to crash into the nuclear reactor at Oak Ridge. So we go to Knoxville, we circle for a while, then they wanted to descend down below the clouds and find Oak Ridge and spot the nuclear reactor just so we'd know what it looked like in case they were to crash the airplane into it. So we did that. We told air traffic control we needed to descend. We did. So anyway, we do that. En route to Knoxville, they wanted to talk to the White House. So I got patched through the White House and talked to a fellow by the name of John Ehrlichman. Some of you may have heard of him. Was an aide to President Nixon. And they wanted a document from the White House stating that this $10 million was a grant from the United States government. And so they assured us that that would be forthcoming. So anyway, we continue holding at Knoxville. Those of you that fly might find this interesting. Do we have any pilots in the room? Oh yeah, we got pilots in the room. Well, when you hold, they assign you a fix and a direction to hold from that fix and either a time interval or a distance interval that you hold from that fix. Well, it appears the sky may have just been ours on that day because we approached Knoxville. I said, Center Southern 49 needs to hold in the vicinity of Knoxville. They said, Southern, you're cleared to hold in the vicinity of Knoxville. So we had a wide open clearance there just to hold wherever we needed to. Basically, the sky was ours. They just cleared all the airplanes out, and we had the sky to ourselves, probably within a 50-mile radius, I would imagine. So anyway, we circle in Knoxville, run low on fuel, go to Lexington, Kentucky to refuel, back to Knoxville, back into a holding pattern. 1 o'clock came. They pointed the clock and said, guys, that's not quite what they said, but anyway, they said, the time is up. Where's the money? So I called the company. I said, but fellas, that's 1 o'clock Eastern time. And when you set this timeline, we were on Central time. I said, we still got an hour to go. And they bought that. So anyway, so finally then the radio cracked and the company came on board and said, we got the money, it's in Knoxville. So we got a clearance to the Knoxville airport and headed that direction. And they said, don't go to Knoxville. Have them take the money to Chattanooga. So we had to get a clearance to Chattanooga, had to hold there until the airplane with the money could fly to Chattanooga and land, because they would not let us leave the runway, and that airplane couldn't land with us on the runway. So we had to hold until the airplane with the money got on the ground. So we landed, and they had demanded $10 million, of course, and we had to have fuel, and we'd run out of peanuts and Cokes and little bottles of liquor and whatever they were serving. And so they had all of these things that they needed, and they also wanted some Kentucky Fried Chicken, and they wanted stimulants for the crew, and they wanted alcohol for them and other stuff. So anyway, we told the company what we needed, and they said when the fuel truck brings us out, have him stripped down to his undershorts and put the things aboard the airplane. So he did that and put a ladder up to my sliding window, and in came all these cases of Cokes and all these bags of peanuts and all this other stuff, and this beautiful document rolled up with a ribbon around it. And they opened that thing up, and it said this was a grant from the United States of America to 3 ornery hijackers. I'm not sure what it said there. But anyway, we got the document. We got the money. We got the Kentucky Fried Chicken. All came through my window. So I held $2 million briefly in the palm of my hand. How about that? So anyway, we got that. Then we took off. They wanted to go directly to Cuba, so we got a clearance to Cuba. So we got a clearance direct to Cuba with radar vectors. So we head out, climb up. The hijackers were really thrilled at that point, in a very good mood. They passed out money to passengers, to flight attendants, brought stacks of money up to the cockpit and gave to Billy Bob and me. We stuffed our flight bags full of money, still money coming in. So we found other storage places we could put money in the cockpit. We were rich. Then we started talking about what we were going to do with all this money. You know, buy a farm, buy cows, all this stuff. So anyway, we get to Cuba. They think they're going to be really important. They think Castro is going to be really happy to see them. And so one of them climbs out the captain's window. They push a maintenance stand up. He climbs out the captain's window, goes in the terminal. Castro wouldn't see him. He comes back furious, very mad. Take off. Let's go to Algeria. Well, we have to have fuel. And so we tell the tower we need fuel. Wait a long time, like eternity. No fuel truck. Call them again. It's on its way. Still no fuel. So finally, one of the male passengers that could speak Spanish said, let me have the mic. Said, put the gun up to my head. He got down where he could see the tower and see the gun at his head. And I don't know what he said, but it got results. In just a little while, here came the fuel truck. But then they were not putting any fuel on the airplane. So the captain said, Harold, slide down from your window and go help them fuel the truck. So up above our window, there's a little nylon strap about like the size of your belt. And so we toss this out, and you slide down, because it's a fur piece from there down to the ground. So you slide down this. So I go back and help them fuel the airplane. They wouldn't let us have much fuel, but enough to get out of Cuba at least. So I was at a crossroads here. Do I get back on the airplane and risk getting shot, or do I stay on the ground and maybe get shot by the Cubans for not getting on the airplane? So I was behind the airplane. They couldn't see me. I thought if I don't get back on, they may shoot the pilot and the passengers. So I crawl back. They put a maintenance stand up. I climbed back in my window, and we took off. And we didn't have enough fuel at that point to go anywhere much, so we went to Key West, Florida, and filled up the tanks. And then took off and wanted to go to Algeria. We said, we don't have enough fuel to get to Algeria. Well, you're going anyway. They had guns, and we didn't, so we told air traffic control we need your radar vectors to Algeria. So they pointed us in that direction. So over the next several minutes, we talked, and air traffic control talked to the hijackers or to us and said, Southern, you're not going to make it across the ocean. No ships out there to rescue. What are you going to do? So finally the hijackers said, go back to Orlando and get some maps and get some more fuel so you can go to Algeria. So we got a clearance to Orlando. Landed in Orlando. I told them we needed oil in the right engine. And so the fuel truck came out. He fueled the airplane, started pulling away. I said, Billy Bob, they didn't put any oil in that engine. We got to have oil. And about that time, we hear a popping sound, like popcorn in a microwave. FBI is shooting the tires out. So somebody said, they're shooting out our tires. Hijackers went crazy at this point. They dragged me out of the seat, flung me back into the cabin, and, flung me back into the cabin. I went back and sat down in the third seat row on the right side aisle seat, talking to the passenger. All at once, Henry Jackson gets up, all at once, McCoy Air Force Base at Orlando, which is kind of a joint use facility. So anyway, I sit down, I'm talking to the passenger. Henry Jackson comes into the cabin, stands right up against the bulkhead separating the galley and the cabin, says, Harold, stand up in your seat, I'm going to kill you. Why did you do it? Why did I do what, Henry? We've done everything you asked. And about that time, Lewis Moore comes up and sticks a gun in my ribs over here, and I take my elbow and push that gun aside. Henry says, Harold, get up in the seat, I'm going to kill you. And didn't have much time to think, but I briefly had a vision of my dad and my daughter. She was a little bit younger at the time, and my wife. And I knew he was going to kill me. I knew I was going to die. And so I dived for the floor, didn't want to stand up in the seat and blow a hole in my head. So anyway, I dived for the floor as I did. He pulled the trigger, bullet went through the seat back tray table into my arm. And I passed out just briefly. And when I came to, he was telling me to stand up. He's going to kill me. About that time, Melvin Cale, one of the other hijackers, came forward from the cockpit and said, Henry, leave him alone. I said, Harold, get up, get back in the cockpit. We're leaving. I'm happy to oblige. So I reached down to get my arm, and the arm feels like it's here, but it's up here, you know. So I grab the arm, pull it back up, and get back in the cockpit. And to buckle up, you got 2 shoulder harnesses to pull down and 2 seat belt things to pull up. And it's kind of hard to do with one hand, but eventually got all that together and got buckled up, and we took off. And I grabbed the checklist with one hand and start doing what I could to help the captain. We get a clearance to first to Miami. They went to talk to President Nixon at Key Biscayne. Didn't reach him, so we got a clearance back to Cuba. Circled there and to burn off fuel. Finally landed. They took their bags of money, stashed them by the overwing exit, pulled the exits out. We depressurized, pulled the exits out before we landed. As soon as we landed, they hopped out the exits off the wing, and soldiers were waiting to greet them just as they got out of the airplane and took all their money. So anyway, so fastest way to evacuate an airplane is with an emergency evacuation slide. And so the flight attendants opened the door, popped the slide, and had everybody jump on that, slide down, and you get off the airplane really, really fast that way. So the passengers got off, crew got off. They said, jump, Harold, jump. I said, Harold's not going to jump. He's got a broken arm. So they disconnected the slide, let the stair down so I could walk off. And then they put me in a taxi cab, took me to the hospital. Everybody else got to go in the terminal, meet the rest of the crew, got to go in the terminal, meet Castro, get a cigar. He did send me a cigar, by the way, which my daughter still has. And I said that I may auction that off today with a starting bid of $10,000, which will all go to the museum. So anyway, the scariest part, apart from him telling me he's going to kill me and I knew I was going to die, I didn't really have time to get scared there. But the scariest part of the whole hijacking was that taxi ride to the hospital. That taxi driver did not slow down for any intersection, didn't stop for any red light. He just got on his horn and went right on through it. So that's the story of the hijacking in a nutshell. Now then, we're going to let Sarah tell and my daughter speak, and you'll speak a lot longer than I did, because I have voice problems and you don't. But anyway, you can maybe tell what you thought about your mom being captured and held hostage, and then and here's the
I
microphone.
don't need the microphone.
Oh, okay, okay.
Do I? Can y'all hear me in the back? That's what I thought. Okay, I am so happy to be here, and I would like to tell you a little story about how I got here. One of your Walnut Ridge ladies, Sue Jackson Gibson, has become a friend of mine since she moved to Little Rock. And so Sue and I were playing cards one afternoon, and one of the ladies said to Sue, "Where are you from?" And she said, "I'm from Walnut Ridge." And this lady said, "Well, what is there to do in Walnut Ridge?" And this was mentioned. The Wings of Honor. Okay. And so she told us what it was and everything. And Sue got to talking with this lady and mentioned Harold. So we're here because of Harold. And she said that Harold had been a co-pilot on a flight that got hijacked. And I said, wait a minute. My mother was on that flight. Now, what are the odds of that? I don't know. But anyway, that's how I got here, was through that conversation about this museum. So anyway, I want to tell you a little bit about my family. Mother and Dad were from Jonesboro. Having lived in Malden, Missouri for a while, he was a John Deere dealer.
That's interesting.
I thought you have a connection to Malden.
Worked there 5 years.
Okay, see? The coincidences just keep going like this. So Dad brought Mother to Memphis where I was living, and I was to take her to the airport late that afternoon so he could go on to deer camp. And that's what I did. And I didn't know anything that was going on until the next day. There was just the telephone. You know, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have computers, anything like that. So it was strictly the phone. And quite frankly, I wasn't particularly worried. I just put my faith that Mother would be fine and she'd be in Montgomery shortly. She was headed that way to visit my sister. Her husband was a fighter pilot stationed at Fort Maxwell, what's it called? Maxwell Air Force Base, that's right. And so she was just 30 minutes from her destination when they got hijacked, unfortunately. And so I want to tell you just a little bit about what she did when she got to Miami. Well, now I'm going to tell you a little bit more. While they were on the plane, all these different stops and things, they hadn't put down the window shades, so she never knew where she was. Never. And so when they would take off again, they could raise their shades and look around. And so I don't think my mother was particularly concerned. You would have to know my mother, and I think she's a lot like me. We take it as it comes to us, and we don't worry about a whole lot of things. And that's why that evening I thought she would be fine the next day. And Mother told us that while she was on the plane, she was concerned more for her children and her grandchildren than she was for herself. And I think that was a nice thing for Mother to say. I don't know that she meant it, but anyway, that's what she did. She did say that she enjoyed parts of the hijacking in that the 29 or 30 passengers that were on the plane, they got acquainted a little bit. And they weren't always had to stay in their seats, evidently. And Mother has a hearing problem, as I do. That's why I talk so loud. And when they asked the ladies to all give up their purses, Mother said, "I'd rather not. I have a hearing aid and my batteries are in my purse." And so one of the hijackers said, "Well, you just keep your purse." And so she did. She also had some Christmas ornaments that she was taking to my sister. And somehow in her carry-on luggage, those got dumped on the floor and they rolled down the aisle and everything, and I don't even know if she ever got them back. I assume she did, because when you all cleaned out the plane, I think they got most of their belongings back. And so I remember Mother talking about not really knowing what was going on up front, and I think she was in one of the front seats, but I don't think she was knowing what all you all were having to put up with the hijackers. I think she understood it when they shot you. I think that got her attention. But when she got, it was all over in Havana the second time, got off the plane, Castro had told them that they were going to have a wonderful banquet, scrumptious. And so they got to this lovely hotel, she said, that looked a little like it should have been in the Depression. From the outside it looked great, but you got on the inside and everything looked a little worn. And the meal was lovely, but the service, the plates were chipped, the glasses were chipped, the waiters in their jackets were mended, and things like that. And the tablecloths, she said, were mended. She did say that her room was wonderful, very clean, very nice, and then she added that caveat, but well worn. So, you know, maybe you understand what I'm saying. When they did leave Havana the next morning, they had no luggage in the hotel room. She never got her luggage until the next day. And I think she was grateful when they finally got to their final destination of Miami and got their luggage and things and found out, you know, that they would be getting off the plane, everything was over, and they could go to where they were originally going. And I think my sister may be one of the smartest women in the world, because she had a tape recorder. And when she picked up Mother at the airport, she turned on her tape recorder. And as they were talking and asking questions from the ride from the airport to their home in Montgomery, I wish you could hear it. It's amazing, all the things that Mother told her. And here's the kicker. My mother has been a scrapper. All her life she's kept scrapbooks. So after the hijacking, she had in her possession 2 wonderful scrapbooks. And when she found out through phone calls and things that Mr. Blair was writing a book, she told him about her scrapbooks, and she told him about the tapes. And he asked her if she would send them to him. And she said yes, she would. And she did, and eventually they got back to the family. I have recently reread this book, and I had to laugh a couple of times because at the very beginning it mentions Mary Melton, an elderly lady. My mother was 66. Thank you, you got my point, didn't you? So that kind of bothered my mother. Mother was calm, as I said. I don't miss anything. Told you about the banquet. Well, that was kind of quick, wasn't it? Okay. An article came out in the Reader's Digest, and so if any of you are ever at a flea market and you run across May of '73, there's a nice article about the hijacking. And again, if you're interested, you don't have to buy this book. You can Google almost anything you want about the hijacking. And I've done both. I've read the book, I've Googled, I've written things down. I think we're all grateful when something comes to an end. And I know that the fact that my dad did not go to deer camp was a disappointment to him. But in a way, it was good for me because he came back to my house and stayed with us during the hijacking. So good things come out of bad. And Mother lived to be 85 years old, and that's the age I am now. And I can't imagine dying at this age. And Mother was a wonderful woman, and thank you, Harold, and for all that you all did to get them home safely. I think the right people were in that cockpit on that day. And how do you stay awake for 30 hours? I don't know. I cannot imagine. So thank you, and thank all of you for coming. And if you would like, please come look through the scrapbooks when you have a chance or whatever. And thank you for having me.
That was wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
That was wonderful.
Thank you.
You can come back next week and we'll continue.
Okay.
Okay?
What's the subject matter going to be?
We'll continue about this. There's a lot more to tell.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, my daughter Debbie was in Walnut Ridge at the time. And so anyway, she was 14 and probably had been to the Polar Freeze, the bowling alley, or places like that, you know. And I'm gonna let her, Debbie, tell just a little bit about where you were, and you can point out some of the things you have there.
Is this on?
It's on.
Okay. Let everyone know I don't do public speaking, so. I wanted to mention, you mentioned about the right crew being at that place at that time. Billy Bob, from what I understand, was on call for that flight. Is that correct? He was on reserve, and I was an airline pilot for a while, so they have your normal assigned crews, and then if someone gets sick or something like that, they call in the reserves. So my dad and Billy Bob had flown together quite often before. And just some interesting things to be aware of is they didn't even have to talk to one another sometimes to communicate. That they'd flown together enough to know that. And so I'm not sure who was scheduled to do that flight, but Billy Bob ended up on that flight. And the other thing about why I wrote McCoy Air Force Base, Orlando was a former, I believe, Strategic Air Command base, and they had longer runways. Some DC-9 may operate off 7,000 foot runway. They had over 10,000 feet runways at that airport. When the FBI shot out the tires, my dad skimmed over it. They took off on rims. They said there were 6-inch grooves cut in the concrete on that runway. And so there, again, a lot of things happened the entire flight. The thing about Malden was really a coincidence. But anyway, yeah, I was 14, Friday afternoon, got out of school. Normally went and hung around with friends I had. That particular day, I did something very special. I went and got my learner's permit. I'd had my learner's permit, but I went and took the test, the driver's part of it. So, state police officer gets in the car next to me. He has me do the block. You know, omni VOR, you're good to go now. At least till I was 16. I obviously had to drive with a person. So that's how my day started off. Of course, my dad had gone to Memphis to begin the trip while I was at school. Like my dad mentioned, Polar Freeze, bowling alley. Me and a couple of friends, Debbie Bradsher, who was 2 grades ahead of me, and her sister, Deanna Bradsher, who was in my, I think I was in 9th grade then, probably 9th grade. We can go to the bowling alley. Came out, I think it was about 7 o'clock at night. And my mother had already told me, hey, I'm going to Jonesboro, going to see a movie, so I'll be back about 10 o'clock. Okay. Fortunately, with my dad being a pilot, you know, he was gone maybe once a week. So my mom, I was an only, raised an only, but pretty much self-sufficient. Come out of the bowling alley, had one of the Memphis radio stations on, and it comes across the news, Southern Flight 49 I think it said it originated in Memphis or on the way to Miami, which was its final destination, has been hijacked. And I was pretty certain that that was his flight. Something about not the destination, but something about the flight number rang a bell for me. And so in my mind, the first thing that came to my mind, got to go to Jonesboro. My mom's at the movie theater. She won't know a thing about it. And I need to find her. So we start driving, hit Highway 63, saw a state trooper sitting on the side of the road, pulled over and explained the situation. And I don't know if the guy thought we were joking with him. 3 teenage girls, come up with some story about her dad's been hijacked. Oh yeah, right. But he said, go home. So, everything will be fine. Go home. When she gets back, she'll hear about it. If anyone knows my mom, she ditched the movie and went fabric shopping instead. Love to sew. But so she had actually already started back. She heard the news. She didn't recognize the flight number, but she knew the itinerary of the flight. And when the news that she listened to said it had, started in Memphis and on the way to Miami, she recognized it. She pulled over. She prayed. Probably took a couple of deep breaths. And then started the drive back. In the meantime, I'm still in okay, she's at the movie mode, get home. And like Sarah said, that day we didn't have cell phones, you didn't have internet, you had one channel TV. Or if you're lucky, if you lived in Memphis, you had all 3 ABC, CBS, NBC channels. But we only got the Jonesboro television. And quite often, they would go off the air at 11 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock, so you wouldn't hear anything until 6 or 7 the next morning. So I'm on the phone, landline, trying to get information as to the theater phone number, call them, if someone can go page my mom. And so about that time, the operator comes across, which probably on cell phones you're not used to this, did what they called an emergency break-in on your phone call. They come across your line and said, hey, there's an emergency happening. You need to hang up. And so it's like I did, and the next thing, the phone rings, I answer it. And it's someone from Southern. But is your mom there? No, she's not. So, but they wouldn't tell me anything, but it sort of hit that, yeah, this is suddenly real, that he's been hijacked. So she gets back. A few friends of the family come over. I don't know how many of you are from the immediate area. Button Wallen was an auto mechanic, loved flying. The other person, was it Bill Cates? Bill Cates was on the radio station here on the Ridge. Again, avid flyer. So they came out to sort of sit vigil with us all night. And there was a third person, a guy named by the name of Roy Baker. My dad taught to fly. He graduated from Walnut Ridge. He was about 6 years ahead of me, and he was there. And so they joke around, sort of kept it light throughout the night because, like I said, once the TV quit, we really didn't hear anything. And so the next morning, about mid-morning, it started getting sort of anxious because we heard that they were threatening to crash the plane into the Oak Ridge nuclear facility. And my mom asked Roy if he could take me in and get me something for lunch from the Polar Freeze. Oh, sure. And so I don't know, at the time it was, oh, well, that's nice, thinking about getting me lunch. But I just wonder, looking back, if it was her way of getting me out of the building situation of them threatening to crash the plane into the nuclear facility. So Roy takes me in. We're there a couple of hours, come back. When we get back, the house is surrounded by 4 or 5 police, state police, deputy sheriff, Walnut Ridge City Police. And what had happened is, I guess, with the demands being met, somewhere the FBI or someone, I guess, got wind that some relatives of the hijackers were making threats to kidnap us, to hold us for ransom. And so after a few minutes of discussion, it was determined that our pastor at the time, Brother Walker, who lived in the college housing here, that we would go and sit the protective custody at his house, and then they would just keep watch over the house because no one would know we were there, basically. So we heard that they had finally been able to meet the demands, the $10 million, which was actually $2 million. Thought everything was hunky-dory. The police left. We figured that they would be coming back to Memphis sometime in the next day or so. My mom, her older sister, lived just south of Memphis in South Haven, Mississippi. So we went home, packed a bag, went to Memphis. Thought, okay, everything's hunky-dory. You know, like Tina said, at that time, hijackings were just usually a change of your final destination for a few minutes. They'd get down there, they would, whatever it was, whether it was political or monetary, and the passengers would be fine, the crew would be fine, and they'd come back. But we got to Memphis and got to my aunt's house, and it's like, something's wrong, something's happened, because they'd gone to Orlando, where somehow my dad had been shot, and all the newscasters at the time, all they were saying was, I guess, when they did the takeoff after my dad had been shot, that Billy Bob came across the radio and made a comment about the FBI shooting out the tires. It's been a long agreement between the Federal Aviation Administration, the government agency that sort of makes the flight rules, and law enforcement, that they don't intervene sort of without more knowledge or being requested from the flight crew to intervene. And there's specific things that you do to the aircraft to indicate you want intervention. And then there are specific things you can put in the, what they call a squawk, to let the air traffic people know that you're being hijacked. And so that was not done. So the FBI decided on their own initiative that they would shoot out the tires, which again put my dad, because they thought he was working the radios at the time, thought he had told them to shoot out the tires, which he hadn't. And so, but I guess at some point Billy Bob came on the radio and said, y'all really made a mistake down there. My co-pilot's been shot. He's no longer of use to me, or something to that effect. Didn't say he was alive, didn't say he was dead, just he's been shot. and he's no longer of use to me, or something like that. And so didn't know if he was dead or alive for like 3 hours. It was about midnight, I think, when they finally landed in Havana, and they finally got word to us that, you know, he'd been shot in the arm and that he was okay. And that was about it.
Thank you. Questions?
Marie, yes, sir? Well, I know that maybe you all would be interested to know, I'd like to know, if the three of you sitting here today, have you figured a question that you didn't know the answer to until today? Is there anything you'd like to ask one another about the whole situation?
When you were in Havana and at the hospital, did you fly out with everyone else the next day?
I did.
Okay.
I did.
But you never.
Let me tell you about the hospital.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. As a young man, I had watched a lot of westerns on TV, and you know, when everybody was always getting shot, and the old doc would take something and pry the bullet out of the guy's arm. You know, they took me to the hospital. They put me in this big room. Covered with a green cloth. The table was about probably 8 feet square, maybe 10 feet square, had all these stainless steel instruments on it. And I thought, now, which one of these things is he going to use to pry that bullet out with? So anyway, I stayed in there for a long time. Then they finally took me into another room and started working on my arm. And I don't know if I was just so tired that I went to sleep. I don't know if they drugged me or injected something or what, but anyway, once they got me in that room, I didn't know anything else till the next morning, and they brought out a pint fruit jar full of coffee that had a lot of cream and a lot of sugar in it, and put me in a wheelchair and wheeled me out front and stuck me in a taxi and sent me to the hotel. But anyway, they had actually sewn my arm up and put it in a cast, and so they sent me to the hotel and checked me into a room, and I tried calling my wife from the hotel, and I couldn't understand what those people down there were saying, and never could get in touch with my wife. And they sent one of the passengers. I don't know. They sent one of the passengers up to kind of help me get cleaned up a little bit, you know, because I had blood all over me and whatever. But anyway, that's how that went. Okay, you mentioned the crew. Could not have, except for the co-pilot, could not have a better crew. Honestly. Next question.
Money.
Somebody took every red cent of it.
Yes.
I didn't get any of it. One of the flight attendants kept a $20 bill, I think.
A smart one. My mother told me that when the man offered her money, she said, "I don't want it." And he made her take it. He stuffed it in her purse, and I think it was $300.
Really?
And they got various sums as they went around the plane. But the next morning when they left to get on the plane, everyone was searched, and the money was taken back. So we got no money.
Interestingly enough, legislation that was passed following this particular hijacking, in 1973, there was not a single domestic hijacking reported in the United States because of legislation that was enacted after Mr. Johnson's flight and experience. Are there any other questions that anybody would like to ask of our panel?
So what happened to the men that hijacked?
Okay, Castro took the hijackers into custody and put them in prison down there, and they stayed there until 1980, and he released them back to the United States, and they brought them to Birmingham for trial. Over the course of a day, the captain and I went down for the trial. Over the course of a day, they all three pleaded guilty. 2 of them were sentenced to 20 years. The one that shot me was sentenced to 25 years.
Any other questions that anybody would like to ask? Go ahead. Did you start crying after that?
Did I stop flying? No, I didn't stop flying. I continued flying, and in 1973, I checked out as captain. I could have checked out as captain beforehand on the Martin 404, which was a twin-engine, propeller-driven airplane. But I liked the DC-9 better, and I had seniority as a co-pilot. I could choose my trips. I could choose the vacations time that I wanted. I might fly 9 days a month, or I might go out, leave here 3 times a month, go to Memphis, be down there for 4 days flying, and with my hotel and expenses all paid. So seniority has its privileges, and so I declined checking out, because had I checked out on the Martin, I would have probably been on reserve 21 days a month. Wouldn't have made a whole lot more money than a DC-9 co-pilot, and wouldn't have had the good flying conditions that I had as a co-pilot. And so I checked out as captain in 1973, and a lot of folks thought that was a reward because of the hijacking, but it don't work that way when you're in a union. Everything works on seniority, and so I had the seniority to check out and did so. Continued flying for several years afterward as a captain.
Sarah, did your mother ever fly again?
Yes, Mother loved to travel, and it didn't bother her one bit, evidently, because she probably took a trip within the next month or year.
Good.
I had one question to ask in closing of our panel. Did the experiences of this hijacking, did it affect your life in any way following? Was there anything you did differently or never again, or?
I have something that I think is a little bit interesting. Probably when Mother got back to Jonesboro, for maybe a week or two, it was news, and she got letters and cards and phone calls. But after that, I don't think she ever mentioned it again. I didn't hear it if she did.
Well, if there aren't any other questions that anybody would like to ask.
I have one.
Sir.
Since you did say you flew several years afterwards, did it affect you psychologically when you flew again after that? Did you ever fear it happening again?
No, never. The only thing physically, it messed up the right shoulder a bit, so I didn't have the mobility in the shoulder that I had previously, and always used that as my pillow, and haven't been able to enjoy that pillow a single night since then. Okay.
Oh, Harold?
Uh-huh.
Mother found this in her bag. You know what that is? It's one of the hijackers' cones.
And I have the necktie of one of the hijackers.
You have the necktie behind you.
Oh, it's behind me? Yeah. And so anyway,
Here.
yeah, the necktie of Henry Jackson.
Woo!
Pretty dressed up to go hijacking.
So we had lots of recognitions afterward. The city of Birmingham had us down and gave us the key to the city of Birmingham. I could never find any locks. I checked it on several of the banks, and it didn't work. And so anyway, and then there's my cigar that Castro gave me, and the museum would like to buy a World War II Jeep, and they're about 15,000. So we'll start the bidding at 10,000. If we can get it up to 15, we'll sell the cigar and buy us a Jeep. Okay, and the Airline Pilots Association at their annual meeting recognized all the crew and gave Billy Bob and me a gold medal of heroism. And so anyway, and then we were awarded the Order of the Daedalian Award at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs in Civilian Air Safety Award, probably in 1974, I think, and got a ride in a glider while I was out there. Very impressive. So anyhow. Oh, yeah. In 1977, the basketball team, I suppose, from where North Dakota had been invited to Cuba for a ball game, and so they wanted the crew that was on the hijacked flight to bring them down to Cuba. So we were selected to do that, and at the time I was flying as captain, and in the union contract, if a co-pilot is drafted, if a captain is drafted to fly co-pilot, he gets more money than the captain does. So on that particular flight, I made more money than Billy Bob did. Anything else?
If y'all have any other questions for our panelists, if nobody has any other
Yes, I
questions.
have a question.
Go ahead.
What was the first thing you did when you got home to your wife and your daughter? How was that? What was the reunion like?
Well, it was pretty nice. It was pretty nice. Yeah, I had to sleep sitting up for 3 months with the arm in a sling. They took me to the Baptist Hospital in Memphis, and the Cubans had sewn up the wound, and the Baptist Hospital or the doctor said it doesn't need to be sewn up. If it does, it'll heal outside and won't heal inside. So they took the stitches out so it would heal from the inside out. But I had to sleep sitting up, and at nighttime my wife would prop pillows all over me so I didn't fall out of the hospital bed. Yep. But it was my first phone call. I got a late night phone call from a senator about
Honey, do you know the hijack?
Oh, that was in Miami. When we landed in Miami, all of the passengers and crew had to go through customs, but I didn't. They put me in an ambulance and took me to the hospital to check me out. And so at that point, I was able to call my wife, and she answered, and I said, "Honey, did you know we've been hijacked?" And she said, "The whole world knows." Yeah, Senator Byrd called one night, maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, wanted to know all about the hijacking. They were having some kind of hearings or something, and I don't know why he picked such a lovely hour to call, but he did.
If while y'all would like to pick a beverage to go with your refreshment, you can ask them questions as you walk across here. You're welcome to ask questions and look at their artifacts that they brought to share. Thank you all for attending our event. If you have nothing else to ask, or ask them as you call by, but thank you for coming. We thank Hayes Supermarkets for donating our cake, and we thank you all for showing support to our museum. Thank you.
We have a lot of plans for this year,
Because
so